I mocked my maid. Then she exposed the truth about my empire. The prosecutor's voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the hushed courtroom, cut through the sterile air. And who better to testify to Mr. Sterling's integrity than his own household staff? My breath hitched, a sudden, sharp intake of air that drew eyes from the jury box, from the judge, from my own defense team, all to me. Then the bailiff opened the heavy oak door, and she walked in. Elena, my maid. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, met mine for the first time in years, not with fear, but with a chilling, quiet knowing. The air crackled, not with accusation, but with a truth so profound it threatened to shatter the gilded facade of my life, my carefully constructed empire built on a foundation of casual cruelty and willful blindness. The silence that followed her entrance was a judgment far more damning than any verdict. It had been a Tuesday, just like any other Tuesday in the sprawling mansion that felt more like a gilded cage than a home. The morning sun, usually a warm caress, felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny indictment of my negligence. Elena moved through the house with a silent efficiency that had always irked me. She was the ghost in my machine, the unseen force that kept my world spinning while I was consumed by the machinations of my business empire. I saw her then from the top of the grand staircase, her back bent as she polished the banister, a worn cloth in her hands. A wave of irritation, petty and unwarranted, washed over me. She was slow, always deferred, a nameless, faceless cog in my well-oiled machine. My empire, built on ruthless acquisitions and a relentless pursuit of dominance, demanded speed, efficiency, and an unwavering focus on the bottom line. In that moment, Elena represented everything I despised: perceived weakness, quiet subservience, a life lived in the shadows of others' grand designs. The thought, sharp and cruel, formed in my mind. She's probably never had a real challenge in her life. It was a thought born of arrogance, of a lifetime spent looking down from the apex of a self-made mountain, convinced of my own infallible judgment. I dismissed her then, not with a word, but with a wave of my hand, a gesture that conveyed my impatience, my disdain, my utter lack of regard for her as anything more than a functionary. The memory of that dismissive wave, so insignificant then, now felt like the first crack in the dam, a tiny fissure that would eventually unleash a torrent of regret. My empire, a colossus of finance and industry, was my life's work, a testament to my ambition and my sheer force of will. I had clawed my way to the top, leaving a trail of broken careers and shattered reputations in my wake. Success was my religion, and I was its devout, unforgiving disciple. Every interaction, every negotiation was a battlefield, and I was the undisputed general. Empathy was a weakness, compassion a liability. I prided myself on my sharp intellect, my ability to see through people, to anticipate their motives, to exploit their vulnerabilities. This keen insight, I believed, was the secret to my dominance. Elena, with her quiet demeanor and her perpetual air of gentle weariness, was an anomaly in my world of sharp edges and calculated moves. I barely knew her name, beyond the polite pronouncements of the household manager. She was simply the Maid, a fixture in the background, as unremarkable as the antique grandfather clock in the hall. My interactions with her were limited to curt instructions, often delivered through intermediaries, and the occasional fleeting glance of annoyance when I perceived her to be less than perfectly efficient. I saw her as a symbol of the mundane, the ordinary, the world I had so resolutely left behind. I had convinced myself that my success was a sign of superior intellect, of a natural order where the strong, meaning me, thrived, and the weak, meaning anyone who wasn't me, faltered. Elena, in her quiet existence, seemed to embody that very weakness. My judgment of her was swift, absolute, and utterly devoid of any attempt at understanding. It was the judgment of a man so consumed by his own perceived brilliance that he could no longer see the humanity in others, especially those he deemed beneath him. The whispers began subtly, mere murmurs at first, lost in the cacophony of the stock market floor and the sterile hum of my executive office. They spoke of irregularities, of discrepancies, of a shadow economy operating beneath the gleaming surface of sterling enterprises. I dismissed them as the jealous mutterings of competitors, the desperate cries of those who couldn't keep pace with my relentless progress. My empire was built on solid ground, I told myself. My foundations were unshakable, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, coalescing into a disturbing pattern. They spoke of illicit transactions, of shell corporations, of money laundering on a scale that made my stomach churn. The details were vague, shrouded in the anonymity of offshore accounts and coded messages, but the implication was clear. Something was deeply wrong at the heart of my empire. I began to feel a prickle of unease, a sensation akin to stepping on a loose tile, the unsettling feeling that the ground beneath me was not as firm as I had always believed. My sleepless nights were no longer filled with strategic planning, but with a gnawing anxiety, a fear that the very edifice I had so meticulously constructed was teetering on the brink of collapse. I started to scrutinize every report, every ledger, every transaction, searching for the source of the rot, for the unseen enemy that threatened to bring it all down. My arrogance, once my shield, now felt like a blindfold, preventing me from seeing the truth that was unfolding right under my nose. The investigation, initially a distant rumble, suddenly became a thunderclap that shook me to my core. Federal agents, their faces grim and unyielding, descended upon my offices, their presence a stark violation of the sanctuary I had so carefully cultivated. Documents were seized, computers were confiscated, and the air, once thick with the scent of expensive cigars and ambition, was now heavy with the acrid odor of suspicion. My carefully constructed world began to unravel, thread by thread, as the depth of the illegal activities within Sterling Enterprises was laid bare. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the complex web of deceit. It was all real, far more real and far-reaching than I could have ever imagined. My initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by a surge of cold fury. How could this have happened? Who was responsible? My mind raced, sifting through the faces of my trusted advisors, my loyal executives, searching for a betrayer, a saboteur. I was the architect of this empire. I was supposed to be its protector. The thought that I had been blindsided, that I had allowed such corruption to fester within my organization, was a blow to my ego, more devastating than any financial loss. The weight of it all, the sheer magnitude of the deception, pressed down on me, stealing my breath, clouding my vision. I felt a profound sense of violation, as if my very being had been contaminated by the rot that had taken root in my empire. Then came the summons, a crisp official document that landed on my desk like a death sentence, a grand jury, a formal inquiry. My empire was not just under investigation, it was on trial. The carefully constructed narrative of my success, the story of the self-made man who had conquered the world through sheer grit and brilliance, was about to be dissected under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Panic, a cold, unfamiliar sensation, began to creep in. I had always been in control, the master of my own destiny, the architect of my own narrative. Now I was a defendant, my fate hanging precariously in the balance. My lawyers, their faces etched with concern, advised caution, discretion, a measured response. But discretion felt like a surrender, and caution was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I needed to understand how this had happened, how the empire I had built with such unwavering dedication could be riddled with such pervasive corruption. The question clawed at me, a relentless torment. Who did this? And more importantly, how could I have missed it? The arrogance that had propelled me to the top now felt like a suffocating shroud, blinding me to the rot that had taken root beneath the surface of my meticulously crafted success. The courtroom was a tribunal, a hushed arena where reputations were made and destroyed. The air was thick with anticipation, the expectant silence broken only by the rustle of papers and the occasional cough. I sat at the defense table, a stranger in my own life, the weight of the accusations pressing down on me like a physical force. My lawyers spoke in hushed tones, their words a blur of legal jargon and strategic maneuvering, but my attention was fixed on the witness stand. Elena, my maid. She sat there, a small, unassuming figure against the imposing backdrop of the courtroom, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed forward. She looked different. Not frail, not weary, but composed. Her presence radiating a quiet strength I had never before perceived. The prosecutor's voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the hushed courtroom, cut through the sterile air. And who better to testify to Mr. Sterling's integrity than his own household staff? My breath hitched, a sudden sharp intake of air that drew eyes from the jury box, from the judge, from my own defense team, all to me. Then the bailiff opened the heavy oak door and she walked in. Elena, my maid. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, met mine for the first time in years, not with fear, but with a chilling, quiet knowing. The air crackled, not with accusation, but with a truth so profound it threatened to shatter the gilded facade of my life, my carefully constructed empire built on a foundation of casual cruelty and willful blindness. The silence that followed her entrance was a judgment far more damning than any verdict. She was not here to defend me or to condemn me. She was here to tell the truth. She spoke softly at first, her voice barely audible above the ambient hum of the courtroom. But as she recounted her story, a narrative woven from years of quiet observation and unspoken indignity, her voice gained a steady, unwavering resonance. She spoke of the late-night meetings in my study, of hushed phone calls conducted in the dead of night, of coded messages passed discreetly through the household staff. She described the furtive exchanges of briefcases, the hushed conversations about offshore accounts and shell corporations, details that had been invisible to me, blinded as I was by my own self-importance. She didn't accuse me directly, not at first. Instead, she meticulously laid out the sequence of events, the intricate financial maneuvers, the deliberate obfuscation that had allowed the illegal activities to flourish. Her testimony was not an emotional outburst, but a calm, precise dissection of the truth, delivered with an almost surgical detachment. She spoke of seeing me, her employer, the man she served with quiet deference, engaging in clandestine activities, her initial confusion slowly morphing into a dawning horror. She described the fear that had gripped her, the internal struggle between her loyalty to her position and her growing understanding of the profound injustice being perpetrated. She had seen the truth, and the weight of that knowledge had become unbearable. She had tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as the machinations of powerful men beyond her comprehension, but the sheer scale of the deception and its insidious impact had finally compelled her to act. The prosecutor presented her with a ledger, a worn, leather-bound book that looked utterly out of place amidst the sterile modernity of the courtroom. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she took it, her eyes scanning the meticulously kept entries. She identified specific transactions, dates, and amounts, cross-referencing them with her own records, a small, unassuming notebook she had kept hidden for years. Each entry she read aloud was a hammer blow, chipping away at the edifice of my empire, revealing the rot at its core. She spoke of payments made to entities that existed only on paper, of funds diverted through complex intermediary accounts, of a system designed to hide illicit gains and obscure the true beneficiaries. Her testimony wasn't about personal vendetta. It was a stark, unembellished account of financial malfeasance, delivered with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She had witnessed the truth, had pieced it together with quiet determination, and now she was laying it bare for all to see. The sheer scope of the operation, the intricate layers of deception, were laid out with an almost unbearable precision. It was a masterclass in narrative exposition, not of fiction, but of factual accounting, each detail a brick removed from the foundation of my carefully constructed lies. My carefully curated image, the persona of the incorruptible titan of industry, was crumbling, exposed for the fragile illusion it truly was. My lawyers attempted to discredit her, to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, a pawn in a larger game. They highlighted her humble position, her lack of formal financial training, her presumed inability to comprehend the complex dealings of a multinational corporation, but their attacks fell flat. Elena met their every question with a quiet dignity, her answers concise and factual, devoid of emotion or embellishment. She didn't need to be an expert. She had simply observed, had seen the undeniable patterns, and had understood their implications. Her quiet resilience in the face of their aggressive tactics only served to underscore her credibility. She was not a puppet. She was a witness, a silent observer who had finally found her voice. The jury watched her, their faces impassive, but I could sense their attention, their dawning realization. They saw not a maid seeking retribution, but a woman of integrity, bearing witness to a truth that had been deliberately buried. Her calm demeanor, her unwavering gaze, spoke volumes more than any dramatic accusation could have. She was a testament to the power of quiet observation, the strength found in unwavering honesty, even when faced with overwhelming power and intimidation. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confession or a sudden revelation from me. It was a subtle shift, a quiet unfolding of truth. As Elena continued her testimony, detailing a specific transaction involving a subsidiary I had personally overseen, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. A hushed conversation I had overheard years ago. A conversation I had dismissed as office gossip now clicked into place. The coded language, the specific names she mentioned, they weren't random. They were pieces of a puzzle I had deliberately refused to assemble. It was a moment of profound, sickening realization. The arrogance that had always been my armor had also been my prison, trapping me in a bubble of self-deception. I had been so focused on the grand strategy, on the outward appearance of success, that I had failed to see the rot festering beneath the surface. My empire hadn't been built on solid ground. It had been built on a foundation of deceit, and I, in my hubris, had been its unwitting and then complicit architect. The realization wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, agonizing descent into the abyss of my own complicity. I hadn't just been ignorant, I had chosen ignorance. The weight of that choice, of that deliberate blindness, crushed me. I looked at Elena, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and saw not a subordinate but a mirror reflecting my own failings. She, who had been invisible to me, had seen everything. She who had been dismissed and overlooked possessed a moral compass far more true than mine. The empire I had so fiercely protected, the legacy I had so desperately sought to build, was tainted, corrupted by my own negligence, and in the end, my own complicity. The courtroom, once a symbol of my power, now felt like a cage, trapping me with the inescapable truth of my own wrongdoing. The prosecutor's final questions to Elena were not about me, but about her own journey, her own moral quandaries. She spoke of the fear, the uncertainty, but also of the quiet conviction that truth, however painful, was the only path forward. Her words hung in the air, a gentle yet unyielding indictment. The silence that followed was not the tense anticipation of a verdict, but the heavy quietude of a soul confronting its own darkness. The judge's gavel fell, a sharp, decisive sound that echoed the finality of my fall. The verdict was read, a string of words that sealed my fate. But the true judgment had already been passed, not by the jury, not by the court, but by myself, in the chilling realization of my own complicity. As the courtroom began to stir, a low murmur of activity replacing the heavy silence, I saw Elena rise from the witness stand. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her work was done. She walked with the same quiet grace she had always possessed, a ghost from my past, now the harbinger of my future. I watched her go, a figure of quiet strength and unwavering integrity, the very qualities I had so readily dismissed. The doors of the courtroom swung open, admitting a sliver of the outside world, a world I had once dominated, but which now felt distant, alien. She paused for a moment at the threshold, a silhouette against the bright light, and then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering echo of her truth. The silence in my opulent study was deafening. Dust motes, illuminated by the late afternoon sun, danced in the shafts of light, each one a tiny, silent witness to my downfall. I sat at my desk, the polished mahogany cool beneath my trembling hands. The grand pronouncements, the ruthless strategies, the empire I had so meticulously built, it all felt like a hollow echo now. Elena's quiet testimony had not just exposed my empire, it had exposed me, stripping away the layers of arrogance and self-deception to reveal the man beneath. The truth, once unearthed, was a raw, exposed nerve, throbbing with the pain of regret. I looked at my hands, the hands that had signed the documents, that had orchestrated the deals, that had, in their blindness, facilitated the rot. They felt alien, stained by a truth I could no longer ignore. The empire was crumbling, my legacy in ruins. But that was secondary. The true devastation lay in the quiet realization of my own moral failure. The world outside continued its relentless spin, oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred within these walls, within me. I stood and walked to the large bay window. The setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a spectacle of fleeting beauty. The city, a sprawling tapestry of lights, stretched out before me, a monument to ambition and human endeavor, a world I had once believed I commanded. But I no longer saw the glittering prizes, the symbols of my former power. I saw only the shadows, the hidden corners where truths like mine lay buried, waiting for their moment of revelation. Elena was out there somewhere, a quiet force of rectitude in a world often consumed by its own illusions. Her journey, her courage, had been a silent testament to a moral awakening I had resisted for far too long. The weight of my empire had been lifted, but the weight of my own truth was a burden I would carry forever. I closed my eyes, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, a gentle descent into darkness, and in that quiet fading of light, a single tear traced a path through the dust of my own making. The hollow echo of that tear rolling down my cheek in the fading light wasn't just a sign of regret. It was the first tremor of a seismic internal shift. My empire's collapse wasn't the end of my story, but the violent catalyst for a painful yet necessary confrontation with my own ingrained biases. For years, I had operated on a deeply flawed heuristic. Worth was measured by outward success, by financial accumulation, by the tangible markers of power. Anyone who didn't exhibit these traits was, in my mind, inherently less capable, less significant. Elena's quiet dignity, her unwavering adherence to a moral code that superseded her own personal comfort, was a direct refutation of that entire framework. It forced me to confront the possibility that true worth wasn't quantifiable in dollars and cents, but in the intangible currency of integrity, resilience, and compassion. Now consider how this applies when you've built your entire identity around a specific metric of success. When that metric falters or is revealed to be flawed, the resulting disorientation can be profound. It's akin to discovering the compass you've relied on your entire life has been pointing north through a magnetized lie. The subsequent reorientation requires not just a new direction, but a fundamental re-evaluation of the very concept of navigation. Furthermore, the sheer audacity of Elena's quiet defiance was a revelation. She possessed no wealth, no social standing, no overt power to leverage. Her only weapon was the unvarnished truth, delivered with a calm certainty that disarmed my entire defense. This stark contrast between her perceived powerlessness and her actual impact highlighted a crucial, often overlooked dynamic. Influence isn't solely derived from position or possessions. It can also stem from an unwavering commitment to principle. Building on this, however, my previous interactions with her were laced with a dismissive condescension, a subconscious belief that her life's work held no intrinsic value beyond its utility to me. I saw her as an object, a function, not an individual with her own internal landscape of beliefs and convictions. This dehumanization, I now understood, was the bedrock of my arrogance. It allowed me to justify my own callousness, to compartmentalize her existence as separate from the moral considerations that governed my own dealings. When you've spent years viewing certain individuals or groups as less than fully human, their actions can't penetrate your self-constructed reality. It's like trying to reason with a painting. It simply doesn't possess the capacity to respond in a way that challenges your perspective. Consequently, the fallout from her testimony wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. The dismantling of my empire meant the erosion of my public identity, the very persona I had so carefully curated. Yet, paradoxically, this loss of external validation created a vacuum, an unexpected space for introspection. I was stripped of the accolades and the power that had previously defined me, forcing me to look inward for a new source of self-worth. This is where Elena's quiet example became more than just an indictment. It became a blueprint. Her strength wasn't in commanding armies or orchestrating market shifts, but in her steadfast adherence to what was right, even when it was terrifyingly difficult. Her actions suggested that true power isn't about control over others, but about control over oneself, about the internal fortitude to stand by one's convictions. Now consider how this applies when your external achievements are stripped away. Do you crumble, or do you discover an inner resilience you never knew existed? It's the difference between a house built on sand, which collapses with the tide, and a lighthouse, whose foundation remains firm against the fiercest storms, its light unwavering. Conversely, my previous life was characterized by a constant pursuit of external validation. Every deal closed, every competitor crushed, was a reaffirmation of my perceived superiority. This external focus meant I was perpetually reactive, driven by the need to maintain my position, to outmaneuver rivals, to impress the world. Elena, by contrast, was driven by an internal compass. Her actions were not a response to external pressures or a desire for recognition, but a deep-seated commitment to an ethical imperative. This internal locus of control, so foreign to my own existence, was the true source of her quiet power. It's the difference between a ship tossed about by every wave, its course dictated by the currents, and a vessel with a true north, navigating the vast ocean with unwavering purpose even when the skies are clouded. Another crucial layer is the realization that my own definition of strength was fundamentally flawed. I equated it with aggression, with dominance, with the ability to impose my will. Elena demonstrated a different kind of strength, the strength of conviction, the resilience of spirit, the quiet courage to speak truth to power, even when it meant personal sacrifice. This is not a weakness disguised as strength. It is a profound, often underestimated form of power that can reshape narratives and dismantle entire systems of belief. The aftermath of Elena's testimony, the hushed whispers of the courtroom settling into a low hum, revealed a profound shift, not just in my external circumstances, but in my internal landscape. The bedrock of my self-perception, built on a lifetime of perceived superiority and unassailable judgment, had been fractured. My interactions with Elena, once marked by a casual disdain, now replayed in my mind with excruciating clarity. I saw not a subservient employee, but a silent observer who possessed a keener understanding of the world than I, the titan of industry, ever did. This realization was not about her inherent intelligence, but about the value I had placed on different forms of knowledge. I had revered financial acumen, strategic planning, the ability to manipulate markets, the quantifiable metrics of success. Elena, however, possessed a different kind of wisdom, one cultivated through diligent observation, empathy, and a deep-seated understanding of human behavior, even in its most clandestine forms. Now, consider how this applies when you've always equated intelligence with academic or professional achievement. When someone whose life circumstances might not outwardly suggest such accolades demonstrates a profound insight into complex situations, it forces a re-evaluation of what constitutes true understanding. It's like discovering that a humble wildflower possesses a more intricate understanding of its ecosystem than the meticulously manicured rosebush in the grand estate. Furthermore, my entire approach to relationships, both personal and professional, had been transactional. I saw people as assets or liabilities, their worth determined by their utility to my goals. Elena, in her quiet consistency, had been a consistent, reliable asset, yet I had never once considered her as an individual with her own hopes, fears, or moral compass. Her decision to testify was not driven by a desire for personal gain, but by a commitment to a principle that transcended her own immediate circumstances. This act of moral courage, born from an internal conviction rather than external pressure, was a revelation. It demonstrated that human connection, at its core, is not about exchange, but about shared humanity, about recognizing the inherent dignity in every individual, regardless of their station. Building on this, however, when you've always viewed interactions as a series of negotiations, where each party seeks to extract maximum value, the concept of selfless action, of acting purely out of a sense of right and wrong, can seem alien, even irrational. It's like encountering a river that flows uphill. It defies your established understanding of natural laws. Consequently, the legal proceedings, while devastating to my empire, served as an unintended catalyst for a profound personal reckoning. The stripping away of my public persona, the dismantling of the sterling brand, left me exposed, stripped of the external validation that had sustained my ego for so long. In this vacuum, the quiet truths Elena had articulated began to resonate with an undeniable force. My previous life had been a constant performance, a carefully crafted facade designed to project an image of unwavering success and control. Her testimony, by exposing the rot beneath the surface, had shattered that facade, forcing me to confront the emptiness that lay at its core. Now, consider how this applies when the external structures that have defined your identity are suddenly removed. When the applause ceases and the accolades disappear, what remains? It's the difference between a meticulously decorated stage set, which looks impressive from the audience, but is merely scaffolding up close, and the solid, unadorned foundation of a building, which endures long after the decorative elements have fallen away. Conversely, my understanding of justice had always been skewed by my own self-interest. It was about winning, about ensuring favorable outcomes, about maintaining the status quo that benefited me. Elena's pursuit of truth, however, was not about retribution, but about restoration. She sought to expose the wrongdoing not to punish me, but to set right a fundamental imbalance, to ensure that accountability prevailed over deceit. This distinction between personal vindication and the pursuit of objective truth was a crucial insight. It highlighted that justice, at its most profound level, is not about victory, but about alignment with an ethical standard, a commitment to fairness that transcends individual gain or loss. Another crucial layer is the realization that my entire operational framework had been built on a foundation of calculated risk and the assumption of impunity. I believed that my position and influence insulated me from genuine consequence. Elena's actions demonstrated that moral integrity, when truly embodied, possesses a power that can penetrate even the most fortified structures of privilege. Her quiet resolve was a testament to the enduring strength of principle, a force that ultimately proved more potent than any financial leverage or legal maneuver I could deploy. The true practice begins now. It is in the quiet moments, when the urge to revert to old patterns whispers its seductive promises, that the real work unfolds. It is in the conscious choice to see the unseen, to value the intangible, to extend empathy where once there was only calculation. It is in understanding that true strength lies not in control, but in conviction. Not in dominance, but in the quiet courage to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it is lonely. The empire may have crumbled, but in its ruins, a new foundation is being laid, one built not on the shifting sands of ambition, but on the bedrock of hard